Get out! No, please stop!
Liar! Stone her! Help me! Don't come back!
You are hereby banished from this village for bringing bad luck.
Listen, come closer, let me tell you a story. A story about a quiet woman a whole village called a curse, a woman they chased away like she was the reason for their suffering. But years later, the truth came out, and what they discovered made them wish they could turn back time. The whole village gathered that morning like they were going to a celebration. But there was no joy in their eyes, only anger, and something worse than anger, certainty. They were certain they were right. Edah stood in the middle of the crowd, her wrapper torn at the shoulder from where someone had grabbed her, her eyes wet but her chin raised. She was not shaking. She was not begging. She was just looking at them, one face at a time, as if she was memorizing every single person who had chosen to believe a lie. The chief elder, Elder Doka, raised his staff and pointed it at her like a weapon. Edah, he said, loud enough for the whole village to hear, you have brought death to this land. You will leave before sunset, and you will never return. Edah opened her mouth to speak. Elder Doka, please, just let me explain, but a woman in the crowd screamed, she is cursed. Do not let her speak her witchcraft into the air. And just like that, the crowd roared. Children ran behind their mothers. Men beat sticks against the ground. Old women covered their faces. Edah looked to the left and saw Nkechi, her closest neighbor, the woman who used to share pepper soup with her on cold evenings, and Nkechi turned away. She looked to the right and saw Brother Emeka, the young man whose fever she had secretly treated 3 months ago with her grandmother's herbs. He was throwing a stone at her feet. That stone did not hit her body. But it hit something deeper. She picked up the small cloth bag she had packed, 2 wrappers, a wooden comb, the small iron pot her grandmother had given her, and a pouch of dried herbs. She did not fight. She did not curse them. She walked through the parting crowd slowly, like a woman who was not being chased but choosing to live. Elder Doka called after her, do not look back at this village. Your eyes carry misfortune. Edah did not look back. Not because she was afraid, but because she did not want them to see her crying. The road out of the village was long and dusty, lined with tall grasses that swayed gently in the morning wind. And as Edah walked, the village behind her grew small and quiet, until all she could hear was the sound of her own sandals on the red earth, and the silence of a community that had chosen to destroy one of its most faithful daughters. The villagers watched her disappear around the bend of the road, and then they went home, feeling satisfied. Crops would grow again now. Animals would stop dying. Children would get better. They were sure of it. Elder Doka drank his palm wine that evening and told his wives, we did the right thing. You will see. His youngest wife, a quiet woman named Sola, said nothing. She had noticed something that no one else had noticed that morning, something she would keep to herself for a long time, something that would one day crack the whole village open like an overripe fruit. She simply washed the dishes and went to bed. Outside, the wind blew harder than usual. And somewhere far down the road, Edah kept walking. Before we dive in, if you love emotional stories like this that teach powerful lessons, hit that subscribe button right now, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Edah had not always lived alone. There was a time, not so many years ago, when she had a husband named Tobias, a gentleman with a wide smile who repaired farm tools and sang while he walked. They had married young, barely 2 years before sickness took him. It was a fast sickness, the kind that arrives in the night and does not wait for morning goodbyes. Edah had held his hand and watched the life leave his eyes, and something in her had gone very quiet after that. Not broken, just quiet. Grief changes some people into bitterness. It changed Edah into stillness. She stopped talking much. She stopped going to the market unless she needed to. She stayed close to her small house at the edge of the village and her small garden and her forest walks. The villagers called her strange. They did not understand that she was simply surviving. Her grandmother, old Mama Chidinma, had taught her the forest before she died. Every plant is a letter from God, Mama Chidinma used to say, pressing dried leaves into Edah's young hands. You just have to learn how to read. Edah had been the most faithful student. She knew which root cured stomach pain, which bark brought down fever, which leaf, when boiled with ginger, stopped a cough that would not let a child sleep. She had learned to prepare healing poultices, cooling compresses, and teas that tasted bitter but worked. After Tobias died, the herbs became her company. The forest became her church. Every morning, before the village woke up, she was already among the trees, collecting, sorting, drying, grinding. It was the one place where she felt completely at peace. But she never used her knowledge just for herself. That was the thing nobody in the village knew, because Edah never told them. When old Bobaton developed a swollen leg that the local chemist said would need expensive medicine, Edah left a wrapped bundle of herbs at his door at night with a small note that said boil and soak. Bobaton never knew who sent it. When the children in the eastern compound caught a skin rash that spread from one child to another, Edah identified the plant causing it, a weed that had grown near the river after flooding, and she pulled every single one herself in the dark, alone, telling no one. When a traveling healer passed through the village and quoted a price that a poor widow, Mama Grace, could not afford for her sick son, Edah quietly paid the difference from her own small savings and made the healer promise not to say where the money came from. She helped in silence, the way her grandmother had told her the most faithful helpers do. If you help for praise, Mama Chidinma had said, you are not helping. You are performing. So Edah lived her quiet life, healing without credit, loving without recognition, keeping mostly to herself. She was not perfect, she was sometimes too stubborn, sometimes too proud to accept help herself, but she was deeply, genuinely good. And the village saw her quietness and her forest walks and her solitary ways and made up their own story about her. People fear what they do not understand. They fill silence with suspicion. They turn mystery into accusation. And by the time the bad seasons came, by the time the crops started failing and the animals started dying, the story they had already written about Edah in their minds made it very easy to give her name to the blame. It started with the yams. One morning, Elder Doka walked out to his farm and found that half his yam mounds had collapsed, not from flooding, not from animals, but as if the earth itself had grown tired underneath them. The roots were black and soft, rotting from beneath. He called his farm boy, Samuel, and together they dug and dug, but every mound they opened was the same, black and rotten at the heart, though the tops had looked perfectly healthy just 2 days before. Elder Doka had farmed for 40 years. He had never seen yams rot like this. He went home with his jaw tight and his spirit uneasy, and that night he called the other elders to his compound and told them what he had seen. By the following week, it was not just Elder Doka's farm. The rot spread to 3 other compounds on the eastern side of the village. Then the goats started dying. 2 of Mama Ngozi's goats were found in the morning, stiff and cold, with no wound on them. Then a cow belonging to the church compound collapsed in the field and would not stand up again. The village herbalist, old Papa Su, said the animals had signs of poisoning, but from what, he could not tell. Then the children, 5 children in 2 weeks, fell sick with vomiting and terrible stomach pains. The village clinic had no medicine strong enough, and families were spending money they did not have sending children to the town hospital. Fear began spreading faster than the sickness itself. People stopped letting their children play outside. Mothers cooked with water they had stored inside, not from the stream. The village was squeezing itself tight with panic. It was in this atmosphere of fear that the whispers about Edah began. It started, as these things always do, with one person. A young man named Connor, who had a history of lying and a long grudge against Edah because she had once refused to sell him her grandfather's land after Tobias died, told his uncle that he had seen Edah near the yam farms at night. I saw her, he said, his voice low and convincing. She was touching the mounds, muttering something. His uncle told Elder Doka. Elder Doka told the council. The council told the village prayer leader. The prayer leader told the women's meeting. And by the time the story had traveled the full circle of the village, it had grown extra details that Connor himself had never said, that Edah had been seen pouring something dark into the soil, that she had been heard laughing in the forest at nights, that her dead husband's spirit had come back through her and was now walking among the farms, eating the harvest before it could ripen. Edah knew the whispers had started. She could feel the change, the way people stopped greeting her at the stream, the way conversations died when she walked past, the way children who had always run to her for sweets now pressed against their mother's legs when they saw her. She went to the village prayer leader herself, a man she respected, and said, "Brother Samuel, I hear what people are saying. It is not true. Please help me." Brother Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then looked away. "Edah," he said quietly, "maybe you should pray more. Sometimes we carry things we do not know we carry." She walked home with a heaviness in her chest that no herb could cure. She had tried to help these people. She had given her nights to their healing. And now they were building a case against her with nothing but fear and rumor and the word of a man who had always wanted what she had. The council met for 3 days. Edah was not invited. She was talked about, examined, judged, and sentenced without ever being given a chance to defend herself inside that room. Elder Doka led the meetings with the firm confidence of a man who believes his instincts over everything else. He reminded the council that Edah had come from a strange family. Her grandmother had been called a forest woman too. He reminded them that Edah's husband had died young and mysteriously, as if that were Edah's fault. He reminded them that she never joined the village women's association, never attended the harvest festivals, never participated in the communal farm days. Every act of privacy became evidence of guilt. Every choice to keep to herself became proof of something sinister. What nobody mentioned in those 3 days was the merchant named Mr. Haruna. Mr. Haruna was a fertilizer trader who had sold sacks of product to 5 farmers in the village 8 weeks before the yam started rotting. He was a smooth-talking, well-dressed man who always brought gifts for the elders and knew exactly how to make powerful men feel important. Nobody questioned his fertilizer. Nobody tested the soil near the farms that had bought from him. Nobody noticed that the farms that had not bought from Mr. Haruna were the farms that had not failed. These details were visible, they were sitting right there in plain sight, but fear had turned all the eyes in the village toward Edah, and when people decide where the blame goes, they stop looking anywhere else. Meanwhile, Sola, the youngest wife of Elder Doka, was quietly paying attention. She was a woman who read people carefully, the way some women learn to do when they have survived difficult circumstances. She had noticed, months ago, that Edah was the one leaving medicine bundles at people's doors. She had once followed Edah secretly on one of her pre-dawn forest walks, not from suspicion but from curiosity, and had watched Edah move through the trees with such gentleness, collecting leaves without breaking branches, speaking softly to the plants as she walked. She had watched Edah stop on the way home to leave a carefully wrapped package at the door of Mama Grace, the poor widow. Sola knew. She had known for a long time that Edah was a healer, not a curse. But Sola was a junior wife. Her voice in this village had no weight. When she tried to speak at home, Elder Doka silenced her with a look that said, "This is not your matter." So she stayed quiet and kept watching and prayed that someone else would see what she saw before it was too late. On the 3rd day of the council meeting, the decision was made. Edah would be formally accused and given 1 day to leave the village forever. The night before the banishment, a young girl named Adis, the daughter of Mama Grace, the very widow Edah had secretly paid for, crept to Edah's door and whispered through the wood, "Auntie Edah, I heard what they are going to do tomorrow. Run tonight. Please." Edah opened the door and looked at the child's frightened face. She touched the girl's cheek gently. "Thank you, Adis," she said. "But I have done nothing wrong. I will not run like a criminal." She gave the child a small jar of honey, the last jar she had, and sent her home. Then she went inside and packed her bag, not because she planned to leave, but because she already knew what was coming. She had seen this kind of fear before. It did not negotiate. It did not listen. It only consumed. After they drove her out, Edah walked for 2 days. She did not know exactly where she was going. She followed the main road past 3 villages, stopping only to drink from streams and sleep briefly under a white tree when exhaustion overcame her. She did not cry on the road. She had done her crying the night before, alone in her house, holding the small wooden comb Tobias had carved for her when they were newlyweds. By morning, when she packed her bag and walked out to face the crowd, her tears were finished. What was left was something harder. Not hatred. Edah was not built for hatred. But a deep, settled knowledge that she was leaving something behind that had never truly deserved her. On the second day, she reached a town called Greenfield, a larger settlement with a busy market, a school, a small clinic, and a church with a blue roof. She sat on a bench near the market entrance, resting her feet, when a woman came and sat beside her. The woman's name was Mrs. Okoro, a trader in her late 50s with kind, perceptive eyes and a voice like warm tea. She looked at Edah's worn wrapper, her tired eyes, and the small cloth bag on her lap, and said with no preamble, "You look like someone who has been cast away. And you look like someone who did not deserve it." Edah stared at her. The woman smiled. "I have seen that look before, my daughter. I wore it once myself." Mrs. Okoro took Edah home that night. She fed her, gave her a small room, and listened, really listened, as Edah told her story. When Edah was done, Mrs. Okoro was quiet for a long while. Then she said, "The herbs you know, your grandmother's medicine, is a gift, not a curse. And there are people here in Greenfield who need that gift. The clinic is small and always short of medicine. There are families who cannot afford the chemist. You could help them, Edah. Not in secret this time. Openly." Edah looked at her hands, the hands that had collected and sorted and prepared medicines for years in the dark. "You think they would trust me?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Okoro looked at her steadily. "Trust is built by showing up. You showed up in your village for years and they did not see you. This time, let them see you." Edah started small. She set up a little wooden table at the edge of the Greenfield market, 2 days a week, with bundles of dried herbs neatly labeled and a small handwritten sign, "Traditional Herbal Remedies, ask me your problem." People were cautious at first. They watched from a distance. But one morning, a young mother came with a baby burning with fever, crying, "The clinic is closed and I have no money." Edah prepared a cooling bath and a strong herbal tea on the spot, walking quickly and calmly while the mother washed. By evening, the baby's fever had broken. The mother told her neighbor. Her neighbor told her sister. Her sister brought her elderly father with a chest complaint. Within 3 weeks, Edah's little table had a line of people every market day, and she was no longer sitting on a borrowed bench, she was standing, walking, healing, alive again. At this point, if you're already feeling this story, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this will change the way you see people around you. 3 years passed. In Greenfield, Edah grew. Not in a slow, quiet way anymore, she grew the way a plant grows when it is finally given the right soil. Mrs. Okoro helped her register as a traditional medicine practitioner. A retired doctor named Dr. Bello, who had come to Greenfield to live quietly after his hospital career, met Edah at the market and became immediately fascinated by her knowledge. He tested her herbal preparations with proper equipment and found several that worked with remarkable consistency. "You are not just a herbalist," he told her. "You are a natural pharmacologist. You have been doing science without a lab." Together they documented her grandmother's remedies, tested them carefully, and developed a small formulary, a written collection of treatments with dosages and instructions. Dr. Bello found a small grant to help them print it as a booklet, and they distributed it free to clinics in the region. Edah also began teaching. She gathered young girls and women in Mrs. Okoro's compound on Saturday mornings and showed them how to identify medicinal plants, how to prepare remedies safely, and how to know when a condition required hospital care rather than herbal treatment. She called the group the Forest Daughters, and within 2 years it had 32 members from Greenfield and surrounding communities. She taught them what her grandmother had taught her, that knowledge shared multiplies, while knowledge hoarded dies. She was no longer the solitary woman who helped in secret, invisible, unacknowledged. She was standing in the open, teaching, building, creating something that would outlast her. And she was loved. Genuinely, loudly, publicly loved. She still lived simply. She had a one-room home of her own now, clean, with a small garden and shelves lined with dried herbs and her small collection of books. She still woke before dawn. She still walked the forest paths with her basket, still talked softly to the plants, still felt that deep peace among the trees that had always been her truest home. But now when she returned from her forest walks, there were people waiting. Patients. Students. Neighbors who stopped by just to sit with her and drink tea. Children who called her Auntie Edah and ran to hold her basket. She had rebuilt herself so completely that sometimes, just sometimes, she almost forgot the village that had thrown her away. Almost. There was still a small scar in her chest where the banishment lived. She did not speak of it often, but on certain nights, when the wind came from the direction of her old village, she would sit at her door and grow very still. She would think about Elder Doka's pointing staff. She would think about Nkechi turning away. She would think about Brother Emeka's stone hitting the dirt at her feet. She would think about the morning she walked down that long dusty road and did not look back. And she would breathe slowly until the feeling passed, and then she would go inside and prepare for the next day, because she had learned, the hard way, the only way that truly teaches, that the best response to people who underestimate you is not revenge. It is to build something they could never have imagined. Back in Edah's old village, things had not gotten better after she left. They had gotten worse. The crops failed again the second season, worse than before. 2 more families lost animals. A child died from a fever that swept through the compound nearest the river. And now a second wave of strange sickness had begun affecting the adults, stomach cramps, weakness, headaches that lasted for days. The village herbalist, old Papa Su, was overwhelmed and under-equipped. The clinic had no specialist. People were spending their savings on trips to the town hospital, and the town hospital was 2 hours away. Elder Doka sat in his compound every evening with the expression of a man who expected the world to have improved by now and could not understand why it hadn't. It was a traveling trader named Jerome who first broke something open. Jerome passed through the village regularly on his route between 3 towns, and on this particular visit he stopped at the roadside stall where Mama Grace sat selling garden eggs and pepper. He greeted her and asked how the village was faring, and she told him, the sickness, the crops, the poverty, the sadness. Jerome frowned. You had a healer in this village, he said. A woman, Edah, I think her name was. Small, quiet woman who used to pay for medicine for people. She helped my brother's wife when she passed through 2 years ago, a fever, nothing serious, but she had no money and Edah mixed herbs on the spot and it worked overnight. Mama Grace stared at him. Edah paid for medicine. For who? Jerome shrugged. Several people, from what I heard. She was known on the road. Travelers talked about her. Said she was the kindest soul in that village. Mama Grace said nothing for a long time. Then she said, we sent her away. Jerome was not the only one. A woman from the market town who visited a relative in the village mentioned that she had once been treated for a serious rash by Edah. She didn't even charge me. Just made the medicine and told me how to use it. A car driver who stopped for water mentioned that when his young son had been sick on the road 2 years ago, it was a quiet woman from this village who had given the boy a abo drink that brought his temperature down in hours. I always meant to come back and thank her, he said. The accounts were small, disconnected, but there were enough of them, and they kept arriving, and each one landed on the village like a pebble thrown in still water, spreading rings that grew and grew until it was impossible to ignore the shape forming at the center. Sola finally spoke. She had been waiting, perhaps unconsciously, for the right moment, and when it came, she took it without hesitation. One evening, when the elders gathered again to discuss the ongoing sickness, she walked into Elder Doka's meeting room and stood until they all went quiet. Elder Doka looked at her with hard eyes. "Wife, I know it is not my place," Sola said calmly. "I have known that for a long time. But I also know something else." She told them everything. She told them about following Edah to the forest. She told them about watching Edah leave medicine at doors. She told them about seeing Edah pay the traveling healer for Mama Grace's son. She told them what the traders had been saying. And she told them the thing she had been sitting on longest, that she had once, out of curiosity, followed Mr. Haruna's route through the village and noticed that every farm he had supplied fertilizer to was a farm that had failed. Every single one. The room went very, very silent. Elder Doka sent 2 men to town to investigate Mr. Haruna. It did not take long. The fertilizer trader was already known to the local agricultural office, and under quiet investigation. A government inspector had been looking into a string of crop failures across 4 villages in the region, all of which had bought from Mr. Haruna in the same season. Lab tests on soil from one of those villages had found traces of a chemical that suppressed root growth, a cheap, bound compound mixed into the fertilizer to bulk up the sacks and save cost. Mr. Haruna had been selling poison and calling it growth. He had done it to at least 6 villages. He had collected his money, given his gifts to the elders, and moved on, smooth and invisible, while each village searched its own people for the source of its misfortune. By the time Elder Doka's men reached the agricultural office, Mr. Haruna had already been arrested in another district. The news came back to the village like a thunderclap. The council met in silence that night. Nobody spoke for a long time. Elder Doka sat with his staff across his knees and stared at the ground. He was not a foolish man, he was simply a man who had allowed fear and pride to replace thinking, which is a thing that happens to many people who hold authority too long without being questioned. He had pointed his staff at Edah with certainty. He had spoken her banishment with the voice of a man who believed he was protecting his people. And everything he had believed, had been wrong. The soil was poisoned, yes. But not by Edah. The sickness was real. But Edah had been fighting it in secret, not causing it. They had taken the one person who was quietly holding the village together and thrown her into the road. The travelers' testimonies were gathered formally now, written down by the village schoolteacher at the elder's request. They found her. It took 3 days of asking along the road, following the trail of people who said yes, I know that woman, with a warmth that surprised the delegation each time. In Greenfield, they found not a woman hiding or struggling, they found a woman flourishing. The market people knew Edah by name and pointed them eagerly to her home. Children on the street called out, Auntie Edah's visitors, and ran ahead to announce them. The delegation arrived at a small, neat compound, a house with a garden of extraordinary variety, shelves of herbs visible through the open window, and a hand-painted sign at the gate that said Chidima Abo Center, all are welcome. She had named it after her grandmother. Elder Doka stood at the gate, holding his staff, and felt, for the first time in his long life, very small. Edah received them in her garden. She was wearing a clean indigo wrapper, her hair neatly tied, her hands still soil-dark from morning walk. She looked older than they remembered, but not in the way tiredness ages people, in the way that peace ages people, settling into the face as something steady and good. She looked at them one by one, Elder Doka with his age and his lowered eyes, Mama Grace with her tears already starting, Brother Emeka staring at his own feet, Sola standing straight and watchful, Daniel with his notebook and his guilt. She looked at all of them for a long, quiet moment. And then she said, with the absolute simplicity of a woman who had already made her peace, "I know why you've come." Elder Doka spoke for a long time. He spoke of Mr. Haruna and the poisoned soil. He spoke of the traders' testimonies. He spoke of what Sola had told the council. He spoke of Mama Grace's son and Brother Emeka's fever and the 7 accounts written in Daniel's notebook. He spoke of the crops and the animals and the children, and how none of it had ever been Edah's fault, and how they had known, deep down, if they had allowed themselves to think clearly, that a woman who moved like her, quietly and without show, was not capable of the things they had accused her of. His voice broke once, toward the end. He steadied it. "We have come to ask you to come home, Edah," he said. "We will rebuild everything. We will make it right. The village needs you." Mama Grace stepped forward, both hands clasped. "Please, Edah. We were wrong. All of us. Please forgive us and come home." Edah looked at them for a long, long time. The garden around them was peaceful, bees moving over flowers, a child's laughter coming from somewhere nearby, the soft weight of a generous morning. When she spoke, her voice was not angry. It was not cold. It was simply the voice of a woman who had survived something terrible and come through it with her soul intact, which is the greatest victory any person can achieve. "I forgive you," she said. "All of you. I forgave you a long time ago, because carrying that weight would have stopped me from building this." She gestured around her, at the garden, the center, the life she had made. "But I will not come back. This is my home now. These are my people. And this," she looked at Elder Doka with eyes that were clear and final, "is what I built because you threw me away." Elder Doka nodded slowly. There was nothing more to say. The delegation left Greenfield quietly, and on the long road home, nobody spoke. They carried with them something heavier than regret, the understanding that you cannot get back what you choose to throw away. And Edah stood at her gate and watched the vehicle disappear down the road, the same direction she had once walked, alone, with nothing but a cloth bag and a grandmother's herbs and a heart that refused to become bitter. She stood there until the dust settled. Then she turned back to her garden. There was work to do. There were people waiting. There was a life, full, purposeful, and entirely hers, still growing. If this story touched you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories like this, and share this with someone who needs to hear this message today.